Alright, so I'm leaving the lower Swedish cabin, which hopefully you watched the video that I just posted on this historic building dating back to the 1630s or 1640s. And now I'm going to walk down to a place called Kent Park. That's its modern name, but it's part of what used to be an old town called Kellyville, and it was basically a mill town with where Irish immigrants worked. So I'm along Darby Creek in Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania. So this area in the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s was known as Kellyville, and most of the activity was a little bit further down. So I'm along Creek Road. So I was just over at the Swedish log cabin, which dates back to, like I said, it's not really known exactly when it was built, 1630s, 1640s, possibly as late as the 1650s, but what makes it important is it's the oldest building in Pennsylvania. And when I've mentioned that, I've seen other people have said, what about this building or that building? And this one is always considered the oldest building. So anyway, so you can watch that video if you haven't seen it yet. But this one's about, like I said, about the Irish immigrants that came here in the 1800s. So there's not a whole lot to see along Creek Road here until you get down. There's a trail that just opened up, a walking, biking trail. It's only a mile long, but it opened up about, I think in the summer of 2018. Alright, so I'm just coming off of Creek Road here, coming down from where the log cabin was, and this is where you start to see some interesting things. So this is the trail I mentioned. This is where it starts here, and it's not even a mile. It just runs down to this park. But this was the area that was known as Kellyville. But we're going to look for some bits, and you're not going to see a whole lot. There's not a whole lot to see that's left of it. But it is an interesting story nonetheless. Very kind of interesting. And like I said, it kind of shows the Irish immigration to Delaware County in the 1800s. So I believe this dam was built in the 1850s. Alright, so the story of Kellyville goes back to a man named Charles Kelly. He was born in Ireland around 1803 and came to America in 1821. He came by way of his uncle, but we're not really sure if it was his uncle. There's a long story there, but basically a man by the name of Dennis Kelly sponsored him. Dennis Kelly had already owned mills in Havertown, Pennsylvania, which is not too far from here. He established his Havertown mills about 1806. After he became successful, he sponsored Charles Kelly to come over. And they together opened up a mill here in what would become Kellyville. So what they did was they first rented a cotton mill along the Darby Creek near Baltimore Pike. Dennis Kelly later sold his shares to Charles so that he could focus on his mill in Havertown. Because Charles had become so rich, he he purchased a lot of land along Darby Creek and along Baltimore Pike. This trail here comes to an end, but this is kind of where you get into what would have been sort of the heart of Kellyville, the old former town of Kellyville. And the mill, where the mill, location of the mill building is of Charles Kelly's mill, would have still been further down the creek here. Up here is the church that Charles Kelly built. Again, he owned all this property, and because there were so many Irish immigrants that came to work in his mills, they were all, Irish Catholics, so they needed a church. Dennis Kelly, who had already sponsored him to come, he had built a church in Havertown called St. Dennis. So Charles decided to go ahead and build a church, and he would call it St. Charles. Now, they were both actual saints. They weren't technically named them after themselves, but this one is St. Charles Borromeo, who I believe was an Italian saint. He just chose those names because those were their names, their first names. So, but he built this church, and originally in 1849, I believe it was started in 1849 and then finished in 1850. But I also believe that this church was rebuilt in about the 1880s. That the original one, I don't know if it something happened to it or if they just decided to build a new one. But a new one was built later. Like I said, I believe in the 1880s. It's actually a nice little church. I've never been inside, but I've been around the outside of it, and I'm actually thinking about going up there and shooting another video of the church itself and the cemetery. There's not a lot of historically known people in the cemetery. There's a couple of interesting people I came across who are buried in there, so I thought actually about maybe looking to see if I could find their grave markers. Some pro baseball players from long ago are buried up there, and actually two brothers who both were pro baseball players in the 1800s. So I thought about trying to go up there and see if I could find their graves. I always kind of like old baseball from the 19th century. So like I said, you can't really see where the old mill was, and you can't really walk much further down here because what happens, you go, right now it's just wet and I'm wearing sneakers. So, and there's really nothing there where the mill was. There's a Kmart on one side of the creek, and actually the Kmart's closing, and then there's like a swim club on the other side. I believe it's on the side where the swim club was, but there's no remnants or anything that I know of there. I do have a description of the building, of the mill building. Okay, there was a newspaper article that described it. It was described as a 5-story building, and it was described as to be very clean and well ventilated. It was powered by 2 water wheels with a steam engine, with a 58 horsepower engine. At the time, mid-1800s, the population of Kellyville was about 500. Now again, that was still technically, this was all Upper Darby Township, so even though it was a town of Kellyville, it was all part of Upper Darby Township. So Clifton Heights, Lansdowne, which actually by rights, I believe the building was in what's modern day Lansdowne, but all that would have been part of Upper Darby in the mid-1800s. Those towns kind of broke away from the township later on in the 1880s, 1890s. I believe Clifton Heights broke away first. So, like I said, all this was Upper Darby at the time. But if you look on any 19th century maps, you only see it listed as Upper Darby. Okay, so coming under this bridge, past the dog park, down through here, and along the creek, and basically this is what you got along the creek until you get down closer to Baltimore Pike, where the actual mill was. And I don't think I said it was like a textile mill, cotton mill, things like that. They made textiles and that sort of thing. Dennis Kelly and his mill in Havertown, what he did was he started making cloth and things like that during the War of 1812, and that's what really got him wealthy, got him started. So when Charles Kelly came, he just, it was kind of like the same thing, and I don't know if it's exactly the same thing, but that was what they both kind of got into. That was a lot of mills, that's what they were textiles, various things like that, different types. There were all different types of mills in those days, but there were a lot geared towards cloth and clothing and that sort of thing. So it's a little bit further down there. I'm not going to walk down there because it's not worth it. But what I am is, I'm just a short distance here from the church, St. Charles Church, that was built by Charles Kelly on his land. And so I'm going to take a look at that. And there's a couple of interesting grave markers that I want to see if I can find. And there's not a whole lot written about the cemetery itself, so I'm just going to kind of go over the edge here and make that yet another video, hopefully, or I'll just add it all into one video. I'm not sure yet, but this will probably be a third video in this kind of short little series here. So let me get up over the top here. I don't think you can see this steeple here through the tree, but as soon as I get over the top here, you'll be able to see it, and I'll see at that point. And if this is only the second part of the three-part video, then thank you for watching this part. I'll link to the first part, I'll link to the second part, so hopefully you'll see this kind of continuation of Swedish immigration and Irish immigration into Delaware County from the mid-1600s up to the mid-1800s. Alright, again, thanks for watching.